if he didn't play another game from this point on, he would finish the season with double figures for goals and assists.
The Bears aren't going to accept this, dropping points at home. Not that a lot of them showed up for it.
It was snowing. Leave them alone.
Forget the transfer fee for now. Just go out there and shows what you've got. Put your name on a game. Is the league over in November? That's what we're discussing this week on 20 Minute Tims. I'm your host Jamie, and I'm joined by Melly.
Yes.
Stephen. Well, boys, what do you think? Is it over?
We're calling it already.
Aye.
Ange did say we like to call it early in this country, didn't he? Back in his first season, but I mean that's the question posed.
Put it on the record. I'm calling it right now. What's today's date? As we record this, 25th of the 11th, 24. The league is done. Overcooked. It's a procession from now on, Matt and Melly. Clip it, save it, do whatever you want, print it out, send it to your dad, clip this and put it in all the Rangers group chats.
Pin it up in the dressing room
Pin
wall.
this up in the dressing room wall. It is over for Baldy Beale.
The Belgian Beale probably is over for him, and normally I'd recoil a bit here, think, see if that goes drastically wrong, they'll pin this, but it's not really them we're worried about, is it? Aberdeen dropped points the weekend, but they're still closer to us, so it's not over for me yet, but it is over for one team, definitely.
What a difference a year makes, because just think back to that, probably about this time last year we were calling it the other way, or were we questioning whether Celtic can even get back into this title race. Fast forward a year and we're calling it in November. I think, obviously, it's not even a joke at this point. Like, we are very seriously talking about whether or not the league even has any competition left as of November.
I saw people on Twitter talking about 10 in a row.
Yeah.
10 in a row time again.
10 in a row. I know. Like, obviously, that becomes a reality no matter what for Celtic fans. Even if we win 2 in a row, it quickly turns to 10, right? But I would urge everyone, 6.5 years away, that is at least. That is in the 2030s, which at this point is a made-up sci-fi decade.
Listen,
that we can't even imagine.
If you're
just now.
pessimistic, that's what. But see, if you're positive like me, you go, well, we've won 4 in a row, basically. So this is 4.
Yep.
Right?
4's basically 5.
4's basically 5.
Yep, mm-hmm.
Once you've won 5, you've broken the back of 9.
Yep.
9 in a row. And then 9 in a row is really a formality, and there's only 1 to go after that. And that's 10. So
when you break it down like
the
that,
next logical step, I mean, when you're on the train going into town, right? There's many stops on the way, but you're just getting the train into town, basically. So that's where we're at. We're getting the train into town. Okay, we're at, I don't know,
sometimes you can even
whatever.
afford to nod off once or twice as well. And there's a few stops in town. You could maybe just get off at the next one as well, yeah.
There's all those stops, you go, Christ, did I pass that? And that's what's going to happen here. We're going to go, God, we did win the title in 24-25.
At this point, you are dealing with certain sort of numerical realities.
Like 11 points.
Yeah, 11 points. So that requires, of course, draws form part of it. Just broadly speaking, it requires Celtic to drop points in more games than they traditionally do. Now, of course, people will think back to, but look at the COVID season, look how badly that went. But it was clear from quite early on that season was going to go off a cliff in one way or another. But this Celtic are very, very different to back then. I'm not saying Celtic are going to win every single game for the rest of the season or even go undefeated or whatever. I don't think Celtic will do that. I think points will be dropped along the way. But even looking at seasons gone by, when even Celtic were maybe even less impressively performing than we're seeing right now, maybe lose 2 games, maybe lose 3, maybe draw 3.
That's after you've won the league as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so what we're dealing with now is that from November onwards, Rangers have to win every single game. And I am conscious of the fact that I'm overlooking Aberdeen. I don't want to be too respectful to the immediate title challenges of Aberdeen. But what I always thought about this season was that Aberdeen have been brilliant, but I don't see it being a long-term thing. They could completely surprise me, but I think that was a bubble that was always due to burst due to some underlying numbers that suggested they were maybe overperforming their points for how they were actually playing. So I don't expect Aberdeen to be a longer term thing. So, but even if we fold Aberdeen into this conversation, what you're dealing with is either one of those teams having to win every single game from November and Celtic having to lose points in more games than they traditionally do. Meanwhile, this Celtic team look set to absolutely sweep this season. So it's remarkable that Celtic have got themselves into this position already.
The fact of the matter is, Melly, that Rangers are running out of games. As games tick down, as Stephen says, the likelihood of Celtic losing the required amount of games, especially if we beat Rangers in the games that we need to beat them in, it just becomes a bit of a procession towards the end. And you kind of look and you go, how is it going so badly wrong for Rangers? I mean, they completely messed up their summer recruitment. I think that's a fact.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the roles reversed compared to how we were last season compared to how they were. People were tipping them for the title. They were top of the league for such a long period of time, and things have just completely spun around.
It's nice, isn't it?
They've got a new CEO.
Oh,
I
yeah,
saw that,
yeah.
Patrick Stewart.
Oh, Patrick. I
the
don't like that.
ex-Man U guy, not the actor. Imagine it.
Beam me up, Scotty.
It's the wrong one, isn't
I
it?
know it is.
Oh, is it?
May the force be with you. And so on. Yeah.
Professor XG. That's what I was going to call him. A Hunlook
That's
Picard.
quite good. Yeah, Rangers have spun out of control. The one at the weekend was a bit of a strange one because look, Phil, I want you in there as long as possible, mate. So see the home games against Dundee United, them the ones you have to win.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's by the odd goal, but them the ones you need to win just to keep you ticking over. The Bears aren't going to accept this, dropping points at home. Not that a lot of them showed up for it, but it's getting to the difficult stage.
It was snowing. Leave them alone. Bears are not equipped to deal with the snow.
So it's getting to the difficult stage where when you start to drop points at home, and they've got to the point where even if they were to beat Celtic in all the games left, it still wouldn't be enough. But Philip Clement has never beaten Brendan Rodgers or Celtic yet, so we've not got that going for them. So they're in a predicament, and I'm all for it.
All joking aside, they brought in a new CEO, and what usually happens is that opens up a pathway to sacking the manager, doesn't it?
A new CEO bounce.
The new CEO bounce side. He might come in and go, look, my first act here is to get rid of the manager. I'll take the blame for that. And I was talking to a Rangers supporting friend recently, and like with deep sorrow in his eyes, and he took a big gulp, and he was just staring into the middle distance. He was just like, I think it has to be McInnes. Like they don't know. No Rangers fan you speak to actively wants Derek McInnes as manager, but they're looking at him going, it might as well be. And I think that's honestly, I would be amazed if Derek McInnes doesn't end up Rangers manager. Derek McInnes is with Kilmarnock. Last time I checked, he's as many points behind Rangers with his Kilmarnock side as Rangers are with us. So the distance between Baldy Beale and Brendan is the same as it is between McInnes and the Belgian. So I wouldn't be too surprised. It seems like the absolute obvious stick-on choice for Rangers manager. And with that, I think is the only way, by changing manager, they're going to mount any sort of challenge. Of course, Stephen, it would require Celtic to slip up, and we don't look as if we're going to be doing that anytime soon. But I think Rangers' only way out of it is, and I know it's a Celtic podcast, but it's worth talking about, is to change the manager, really.
Yeah, and even when you look, we talk about these games that Celtic have to drop points in. Again, I leave aside the very real possibility that could happen. Of course, it will throughout a season. But even when you look at just league tables from years gone by, it doesn't take into account, just looking at the bare numbers of it, that Celtic often kind of down tools a little bit after the league is already won. Yes. So you look at, look, they lost 4 games in that season, but 3 of them were after the league was already won and they were making changes. There was famously that time under Ange where it just went to absolute pieces, lost at Ibrox, and was that disastrous game against Hibs. So these happen after seasons, but after championships are won. But Rangers, their position, what you might find with changing manager is that it might be the opposite, because one, I don't know if they can really afford to get rid of another manager and have yet another manager still on the books, as they've probably got several others. 2, sometimes new board members or new kind of hierarchies come in at clubs and decide to keep a failing manager for a little bit, just to let them get their feet under the table a little bit, because all the pressure will be on the manager, and then they will get rid of him when the pressure becomes intolerable. Man United have just done that. Yeah, that's a perfect example. They got everything in place from the kind of top down and left the manager, gave him a new contract until it was completely intolerable from pressure from the fans, and then got rid of him when he was the major scapegoat. So you might find that Clement is just hung out to dry by the people above him again. He should have been sacked ages ago. So I think that those are the only 2 reasons probably keeping him in place just now. And I'm long past the belief that, but hopefully they keep him because they might get somebody good in. We used to say that all the time, remember? But when have they ever done that? No. What is the likelihood that they're going to pay off yet another manager and with no money in the bank go and get this proven winner? Because they've tried everything. The last 2 of their last handful of managers, so Giovanni Van Bronckhorst and Philippe Clement, have been successful managers in other countries. They've won other comparable European leagues. So they've nowhere else to go other than just go ultra staunch and just bring in some right good Rangers man. The Kevin Thompsons, your Neil McCanns.
He's trying to get in there. That is
Barry Ferguson as assistant.
Seriously simping on every channel we can get in to hope and get that Rangers talk.
How many managers have we been through during this podcast, man?
Rangers managers. Well, my Rangers supporting friend I was talking to astutely made the point. He goes, "We've never had a successful foreign manager." It's getting very insular. It's getting very Trump. It's getting very Trump amongst them. You know, America first, Rangers first. Melly, people might watch this podcast go, "That's a lot of big talk from some Celtic fans considering how bad we started the Hearts game." It did look for a while like this isn't really the Celtic that we've seen all season. Is it international hangover, too much travelling for some of our players? It clicked into gear in the second half, but it wasn't. We didn't really fly out the traps.
No, we didn't. We've seen before the break Celtic were flying in a lot of games, Leipzig and the Aberdeen game, but we've seen the Aberdeen game the last post-international, it wasn't too great either. And Brendan Rodgers mentioned it on Friday about how they were only getting certain players back on Thursday and Friday, and in the lead up to training it might not be ideal. Still expect when Celtic go out there we could put a full strength team out. It just wasn't great. We weren't sort of getting into a flow of the game, but Rodgers mentioned it after the game that Hearts sort of changed the way they pressed in the game. Celtic made a slight adjustment at half-time. I think he said they dropped another one of the midfielders back to make an extra body in there, and after that Celtic got out. But while Celtic weren't great, we weren't terrible either.
No.
It wasn't as if it was a game last season where we've seen, and this is what when Stephen's talking about Celtic, how Celtic need to drop points. These are the kind of games that Celtic drop points in.
Yeah.
And even though we get 4 goals at the weekend, Celtic weren't brilliant. We still scored 4 goals and we won that game really, really comfortably with Craig Gordon making a few great saves. So I think that's the difference, isn't it? We are desperate for Rangers to keep hold of their manager because he's so poor all round and in game, and Rangers will just be desperate for somebody to take Brendan Rodgers away because he makes slight changes. Celtic get the victory.
I think one of the things that are making us feel so assured about Celtic at the moment, though, Stephen, is that partnership that's forming between Trusty and Cameron Carter-Vickers. There's a bit of question, especially on this podcast, about, okay, Austin Trusty comes in, does that automatically mean that Liam Scales is bombed out? And I think even I'd said at the time, I says, I don't see it because of how hard Liam Scales has worked to get himself into position. But when you see, the quality of Austin Trusty, you're starting to see that money that we've spent, and the partnership that him and Cameron Carter-Vickers looks pretty formidable.
Yeah, it really does. And despite the fact that I would agree that the first half wasn't great, Hearts had a few chances that they maybe should have scored. I think they unquestionably should have scored the one with Spittle. Just sort of hit it, a couple of minutes in, hit it very tamely at Schmeichel. But what I would say is that the rest of the chances that Hearts had, you look back at some of the first half and even a little bit of the second, huge moments from the likes of Trusty and Cameron Carter-Vickers just throwing their body on the line, the amount of blocks that were going in, when Celtic weren't necessarily clicking all that well, when Hearts did have a few half chances, a few snapshots inside the box, you watch those guys and they're just on top of everything in a flash. And as I said, Spittle was the only chance where I thought they should definitely have scored that.
Was that the one Shankland laid off to
him? Yeah. So he was clean through and he just sort of hit it tamely at Schmeichel. It was a decent save, but again, one you would expect him to make. But the rest of them were all good opportunities positionally, but were snuffed out by really good defending. Of course, that's not really what you want to see in a Celtic performance, is last-ditch defending, but ultimately that's why these guys are there.
It's a job.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. You cannot you cannot dominate any 90 minutes of football 100%. There always will be moments. It's just that maybe the Hearts first half had more moments than we're accustomed to in a Celtic game that they looked slightly dangerous. But other than that, those two guys just kept them completely quiet. Not that they're up against an awful lot with Lawrence Shankland looking more and more.
Well, we've done the Shankland thing. It is like... I read something midweek where somebody sort of criticised the condition Lawrence Shankland is in, and putting rivalry aside, okay, for one moment, you're looking at Lawrence Shankland.
Respect, mate.
Yeah, thank you. And he never really took any ownership of the fact that he's not really performing that well this season and that he's really out of shape. You know, he sort of says, look, I've never been the most conventionally attractive footballer or something like that. And I thought to myself, no, Lawrence, we're talking about your little belly and how we can all see it in your heart strip. And the guy's fallen off a cliff completely. I mean, last season, Melly, he was lethal. In games against us, he was lethal. There was no stopping the guy. This season, completely different prospect.
Yeah, scored a couple of goals, and I could just still see Matt O'Reilly going, seriously? Him?
I know.
He beat me to the Player of the Year.
I know.
But it just looks a bigger shadow of his former self last season. So it's going to be difficult for him to get back in it. He's going to be leaving Hearts at the end of the season. It just seems like it'll just peter out for him.
He's kind of following the Griffiths trajectory.
Morelos as well. I mean, we've seen it all before with these guys where they get to a certain point and their complete lack of professionalism falls away because they can no longer skate by on that maybe natural youthful fitness that they always had throughout every level. They were maybe a little bit faster. They stood out at certain levels. But as soon as you get to that kind of late 20s, I mean, Morelos was even earlier than that. He was basically done by the age of 26. So it's not a coincidence that these guys start to look a little bit unfit and then they're completely bombed out of their relatively major clubs they play at.
Especially if you're going up against Carter Vickers and Trusty, two really good defenders, both quick, both very strong. You need to be on top of your game, and if you're not going to be sharp, if you're not going to be at it, then you're not going to get many opportunities. We've seen Celtic gave up opportunities last season against Hearts. Like you said, I think Shankland got 2 goals against us, but nothing this season, and it didn't look like it. And those two at the back just seem as if it's that sort of perfect blend of maybe Carter Vickers and Starfelt was good, but this one has potential to be a bit better. I don't think they might not go on the same sort of unbeaten domestic thing, but just the way they complement each other. With the one big thing with the Starfelt thing was he looked awkward on the ball, but with Trusty on his proper foot on that left hand side, it's going to be easier for him to look better. And I just think he has that sort of physique about him and the pace as well. So he's got a bit of everything, and passing's not as bad as I thought it would be from what we first thought we were getting.
It's the conversation we had a lot at the time about Starfelt, about how he's a brilliant penalty box defender, but the reason he maybe catches a little bit of criticism is he looks a little bit unnatural, a little bit uncomfortable on the ball. And what we all noted at the time was, see if you had a left-sided defender who was, if not necessarily equivalent to Cameron Carter-Vickers, but a lot closer to his level than Scales or, I don't know, Jens or anything. The guy Welsh, the guys we've had kind of around the team, if we had an equivalent, close to equivalent left-sided, then it's going to just marginally, incrementally improve Celtic in the way that they are able to pass the ball out just by having that left-sided defender. Not just any left-sided defender, but a good one, and that seems to be what we've got.
Here's a question for you then. Who's more handsome, Starfelt or Trusty?
Oh, don't make me pick.
I have to.
I'm just going to nip this right in the bud. Okay? The thing about the Celtic defence is they are very, very well equipped to handle most situations. And when you've got a player like, I was going to say Starfelt, when you've got a player like Trusty on the left who's got the pace, who can play on the left side, you've got Carter Vickers who's physical, can read the game really well. But with Carter Vickers' injury situation, there's still going to be lots and lots of games for Liam Scales. And that's what the manager was saying. He's going to need his squad going through with all the competitions we're playing in Europe and Cups and all that. We're going to need the squad to contribute. So it was interesting to see that AJ got hooked and Ralston came on. Obviously, AJ was playing some international stuff. But I'm looking to the left side and I'm thinking, well, what are we going to do about that left-hand side situation? Because it looks as if Bailly's going back to Barcelona. That's the rumour. Still no contract for Greg Taylor. I might resign from this podcast if Greg Taylor doesn't get a new Celtic contract. There's still no new contract for Greg Taylor, which to me, the only situation, or one of the situations to me that makes sense about that is perhaps Greg knows that there's another left-back incoming and he's maybe been offered a contract that reflects that, or maybe he's like, look, I'm at a crossroads here, and the next contract I need to be playing every week. And he's got sight of maybe there's a new left back coming into the club that Celtic are eyeing as number one, and he doesn't want to sign that contract. The rumour is we've heard KT's coming back. I've heard rumours of Robertson for Liverpool. I don't really see that one panning out, but the KT thing. So
both just get all of the Scotland left backs, Taylor included. Yeah,
and then get Steve Clark in and show us how to play them.
Yeah.
So the Taylor contract thing, it's lingering and it's starting to look like an outlier. And the longer it goes on, the less likely I see that he's going to sign a new contract. And left back is looking like a position we're going to have to address in January. But how pleased are you that AJ signed his new deal?
Delighted, absolutely delighted. He's been tremendous this year, actually. Sort of Nicholas KUHN's blowing everyone out the water, but you could say Alistair Johnson's right behind him in the Player of the Year. He's added so much to his game, and I think this is what Brendan Rodgers can do with players. We know that he's very good at developing players, but not just young players that are still, he always talks about, you can always learn every day. Even players, I think he spoke about it at the weekend, into their 30s can still be learning. AJ has always been that sort of, we compared him to Juranovic because that's who he replaced at the start, and he thought, AJ's maybe a better defender. Right now I'm looking at it, is he better going forward than Juranovic now? He's more powerful. He's exactly the sort of fullback I think Brendan Rodgers would want, that power. He's very good defensively, he's quick, and he's adding goals and assists to his game this season. So to get him signed in a new deal, when we first brought him in, Alex was raving about him, a scout from the Athletic. So we're starting to see this player we've got. And dare I say it, he's one of the sort of team leaders in there as well.
Definitely. But it strikes you as someone who's part of that leadership group, doesn't it? I love AJ. I think he's brilliant. I love his personality. I love what he brings to the team. And I genuinely think the growth that you've seen in him since he first came to Celtic, it's just been remarkable. He's a brilliant. I compared him last week. I think it was last week on this podcast. I says he's starting to remind me of Kieran Tierney a wee bit, just the physicality and the way that he plays and approaches the game. But he's undroppable for us. He's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, well, he seems to combine a lot of the things that made Kieran Tierney such a good player. I don't want to compare them directly as players, but I just mean little things that remind you here and there, the sort of tigerish battling that you sort of hope is that's a participation prerequisite. You have to have that to get in the door at Celtic, right? You have to be someone who works very, very hard to get into this team. But he's also starting to get it's such an attacking threat. I think I spoke just a couple of weeks ago about the amount of chances he's creating, and he's top of a lot of these charts on like FOTMob and a lot of these sort of stats sites that you see that Alistair Johnston, the chances he's creating are very, very high for the team. So really, there's no other way to describe him than like a fully all-round Celtic fullback and a proper leader as well. And I wonder if it's maybe influencing indirectly the Greg Taylor situation, because Greg Taylor, a lot of, again, I caveat this by saying you might not rate Greg Taylor, but managers do, and they always talk about what a presence he is in the dressing room and what a leader he is. If he's in that sort of 3 or 4 main influences in the dressing room, Greg Taylor's in there. But I wonder if like Alistair Johnston has now signed on long term and he is starting to take that kind of mantle from Greg Taylor potentially. And you know how some players in the past have been they've been accused of only playing well up until they get a new contract and then just sort of falling off a cliff. I wouldn't name any names, Samaras, but there are some players that you might have had that I'm going to get some heat for that.
It's okay, he's a fraud. I'll defend you. He's a fraud.
But you know how it's sometimes thrown at players that you only played well just so you could sign that lucrative new contract and then you've chucked it. Greg Taylor seems to be going about it the opposite way. He seems to be playing worse in the build-up.
He didn't have the best. I do wonder if the contract thing's sort of playing on his mind a wee bit. Brendan Rodgers is becoming a wee bit, not prickly, but before it was like, I love Greg, I wanted to stay, and then the most recent comment on it was like, we need it resolved one way or another sooner or later, and I can understand why Greg's taking his time. I'm on the record of being a Greg Taylor fan, but I'm also an AJ fan. I would never choose between them, Melly.
Just when you were speaking earlier there, I was having a wee smirk because you're talking about Celtic have got this guy lined up, they know what they're doing and that, and then thinking back to this time last year, like, the club haven't got a clue what they're doing. What are they doing here? Now we're dishing out contracts, we're giving them the benefit of the doubt that we've got players in, but they seem to be doing a lot of things right. For all we can criticise Celtic for, and we will, they seem to be getting all these guys on contracts over the last couple of years. We've dished out O'Reilly, get a new contract, Hatate, Kyogo, Maeda, Carter Vickers, McGregor, everybody, now Johnston, they're all signed
FORREST.
up. Yep, all signed up long term, and it doesn't look like this team's going to get ripped apart anytime soon. There will be the odd one or two that go, but we're sort of keep the nucleus of this team together, and it bodes well for the future. And if we can just sprinkle wee new signings in here and there, but I think the left back and winger are probably something. I don't know how we look at it in January because we've got 2 left backs. For me, I would see that Baye will be here to the end of the season, probably Greg Taylor as well. So do we go and get somebody in January, or
like
is it going to be
contract or something?
Is it going to be an end of season one? But the longer the Greg Taylor thing goes on, it's kind of totally different players, mind you. But Mo Salah's not signed a new deal with Liverpool, neither's Trent, and nobody's really thinking, they'll be here long term. And in a month's time, Greg Taylor can pretty much talk to teams, can't he? So it just looks like it's a sort of standoff between them, and nobody's getting anywhere, but somebody's going somewhere.
How do you feel about James Forrest being offered a new deal or given a new deal?
I cannot believe I'm saying this either, but I'm delighted. The turnaround we seen in him last year, when he comes on in games, he still looks effective. He had a couple of decent runs. He'd won the penalty at the weekend, and if Maeda or KUHN need to go off, he's my first port of call ahead of Yang and definitely ahead of Palmer. So happy he's got a new deal, and I always said it, like I said a couple of weeks ago, there's no room for sentiment in football. There is when it comes to this sort of thing, isn't it? Because the guy's served the club well. He's not been the best player in my opinion, but he's came into this sort of twilight of his career, and he deserves to see his time out with Celtic. For me, I wouldn't want him, if he wants to go away and get another year at a club, that's fair enough, but I'd rather he just stayed a one club man. And to be honest, he's our best option outside of the two guys that start. And I think that's the other position we need to look at. But happy enough that he's going to be here.
Stephen, occasionally we get invited up to press conferences, we get to ask players questions, and I've often thought I would love to ask James Forrest how his game has changed, how he's adjusted his game from that early sort of winger to today. But the answer would be, well, I haven't. Because watching him against Hearts, he still does the thing where he knocks the ball and he's got a wee bit of pace, his arms are full. The most James Forrest is, by the way, for the record, I'm delighted, like me, that he's going to see out his contract with Celtic. I think he had a renaissance last season. He absolutely deserved it. His contribution's been brilliant, and he is a viable option for us now. The most unconventional footballer I've ever seen. Like, I've never seen and never will see a player that runs the way he does, flailing arms and constantly using the outside of his foot to kick the ball.
He had a belter against Hearts where he scooped it with the outside of his foot right to somebody's shins.
It's just amazing how he's managed to carve out such a successful career for himself with and now what I mean is, like, nowadays, like, everyone's got like a sprinting coach and a throw-in coach and your gates analysed. It's right. No, what you want to do is make sure that bit of your foot hits the ground right. None of that happened with James Forrest. He was just sent out there chasing. I thought, it looks like he's chasing a bin bag blown in the wind or something. Like,
chasing chickens.
Chasing the chickens. Chickens, I've used that one before, haven't I? James Forrest chasing chickens. So no, I'm a completely unconventional footballer as far as wingers go, but I'm absolutely delighted to see him, and there is room for sentiment on this podcast.
I think so, and you're right about the very unusual nature of James Forrest's run, and everything about him physically doesn't seem like it should work. No. He's like a bumblebee. the wings are too small. How does this fly? Right? It's like James Forrest is a bit like that. And you're right about, I mean, I don't want to make too much of it because ultimately he's had an incredibly successful career, and almost unrivaledly, that's not a word, but you know what I mean, like, unprecedentedly successful career in terms of Celtic players. He's could very well
become number one.
Yeah, he's going to be the most decorated player in Celtic's history, which is incredible. But you mentioned things like sprinting coaches. The first thing any sprint coach would do would be like, put your arms down, man. It's so much wasted energy to be like running like that. You would never see somebody running 100 metres like that. But it seems to have worked for him inexplicably. I don't know why, but what a turnaround. I'm perfectly happy for him to get another contract. I think it's deserved, and I think when you are able to apply the sentimentality thing, now this isn't some contract we're handing out willy-nilly to some guy who's going to feature not at all. That it'd be inappropriate of us to frame it in a way that it's just we're just giving him some sort of lifetime achievement award. He still merits it on the pitch on occasion. He's still more than capable of contributing. But I think back to, I still remember where I was exactly when I found that he'd signed a 3-year contract 2 or whatever 3 years ago it was now. I was heartbroken. I was in Covent Garden in London, just enjoying a lovely day out from lunch, and I get a text through saying James Forrest 3 years.
Just like that big scream.
Dropped to my knees, cleared the table. But it just shows you that was my perception of him at the time. I thought, what are we doing here? We have to move on at some point. But
turns out we don't.
No, we don't. And his contribution last season was exceptional when he came in for that sort of second half of the season. Incredible. Not quite so much this season, of course. He hasn't got his customary goal. That means that the streak continues. What is he up at, like 15 years?
This will be 15.
This will be 15 that he's scored in consecutive seasons.
We need to do that. He
should have given him the pen.
He should have taken the pen or something.
But
he won it as well.
Yeah, so he did. Yeah. What a turnaround it's been. And the only negative that I would see expressed about that, I've seen a few comments, and I would only cite them if I thought they had any merit behind them at all. I do see the odd comment saying that this is now standing in the way of younger players coming through, but my point to that would be that's a very different situation. That's a completely separate, massive problem that Celtic have that's not related to James Forrest, in my opinion. That's something that needs to be worked on separately to giving James Forrest a new contract. I do get that his existence in the squad is maybe taking the place of some younger player, but who is that younger player?
That's the problem, is that
they have to warrant it.
He's not taking the place because there's nobody there.
That's what I mean. So that's what I mean. It's a completely separate issue, which I do take on board that we need to be better at that, of course, but that's not going to be solved by 1 year of James Forrest. That's not going to be made or broken by having James Forrest for an extra year, which he more than deserves. This will be, I think, taking him up to just short of his 35th birthday, having been in the Celtic first team situation for like 17, 18 years by that point. Incredible.
Well, since we're on the subject, you want to play a little game, Martin Melly?
Go for it.
Right, here we go. Right, I want you...
Is this some hashtag content?
This is some hashtag content. I want you to just rank these wingers, right? So James Forrest or Aidan McGeady.
McGeady.
Okay.
A quick game is a good game.
Yeah. Aidan McGeady or Paddy Roberts.
Aidan McGeady.
Oh wow, Aidan McGeady or Scott Sinclair.
Sinclair.
Or Moya Lunacy. Sinclair or Abada. Sinclair or Mikey Johnson. Sinclair or Nicholas KUHN.
Nicholas KUHN
or Jota.
That's a Jota right now, but ask me at the end of the season.
Jota wins then.
Jota wins. Where do you think Nicholas KUHN's going to rank at the end of the season? Because
should have put Mikey Johnson at the end.
we had the pre-match.
Yep.
All in. It's called All In Live Hangout, and that's on patreon.com/20Minute Tims, where you can support this podcast through extra videos with extra writing, extra podcasts. Patreon.com/20Minute Tims. Support us. The link is in every bio. And I made the joke that the Nicholas KUHN hype train has to stop at some time, and then he rattled in another goal. Where's it going to end?
It's not going to end the way we're looking at it right now, and where he's coming a shot less than a year is incredible for the guy. Looking at the numbers, you're going, this isn't sustainable. But even if he drops off slightly, the numbers will still be incredible come the end of the season.
If he didn't play another game from this point on, he would finish the season with double figures for goals and assists. If he didn't play a single other game, that is already like a standard you would put to a winger on day one, right? We need to be getting double figures.
Yeah.
We need to be getting double figures and assists as well. And he does it by November. So it's very unlikely that that's where the numbers will stop. But even if it did, it's still a good season.
But these a lot of these time with these things we do this, don't you? You need to be getting double figures in assists, double figures of goals. Rarely do wingers do it. It's all spread across 3 or 4 wingers, but he's doing it right now, and it's going to get to the point where he's going to be hated by a lot of players, because in years to come it will just be, we need a Nicholas KUHN.
Yeah.
Or remember that season Nicholas KUHN done that? Because this is an incredible run of form. It's not even a run of form, it's incredible form. And the goal as well, Brendan Rodgers was talking about the pace, and I was like, when Hearts lose the ball, they barely even lose it. Less than 10 seconds later, the ball's in the back of the net from the 18-yard box, pretty much. The pace of him and Maeda is incredible, and not even just the pace, the finish. Like this time, when we first signed him, you probably couldn't imagine him getting up to that speed, but also that finish is a guy of the highest confidence and quality. Craig Gordon, like nobody's even had a sniff about should he beat his front post, because it's past him before he can even see it. Nothing to do with age, nothing to do with agility, just an unstoppable strike.
Yeah, incredible. We're fast running out of things to say about Nicholas KUHN, because it is now weekly. We're not that long on from him having announced himself on the European stage in the Champions League, and hopefully that continues. Now starting to be tentatively spoken of in terms of international recognition. I think Nagelsmann had named him. Of course, the international managers do that all the time. They'll just say they're keeping tabs on X player, but there's no reason for them not to be having a look at KUHN. If he's doing that in the Champions League, of course, Scotland will be treated, the way Scotland is treated by a lot of outside, outside sources, right? But if you're doing that in the Champions League against Leipzig, if he can sustain that, then there's no reason he wouldn't be involved in the Germany setup. And hopefully he does, because it will be proof of not only his progression in the Celtic team, but kind of that Celtic are doing something right as well. If we can get a player in the Germany setup who I mean, they're maybe not as good as they've been in years or decades gone by, but they're still full of good attacking players.
We'd have someone in the Belgian team and someone in the Germany team. Exactly. It's almost unheard of for Celtic in recent years. Speaking of the guys in the Belgian, how do you think Arne Engels is getting on? I appreciate that taking the transfer fee out of it, right, for a moment, parking the transfer fee for a moment. I just think he's lacking influence on games. I think out of the 3 midfielders, I think he's the weakest we've got, which is, he's up against Hatate and Callum McGregor, 2 fantastic players. Yeah. I think, personally, for me, Bernardo is probably more effective and a better player than Engels is at the moment. But reflecting on Nicholas KUHN last season and the fact that Brendan kept playing him, Brendan kept challenging him to show his worth, and reflecting on the fact that Arne Engels is only 20 years old, he's not going to get any better if we bench him. So whilst Celtic are still winning games, and whilst we're still performing well, and whilst Engels is still showing it in glimpses in certain matches, I can understand why you keep playing him. because he is a young player. He's only 20 years old.
21, I think he is.
Is he
but
20?
For all the difference that makes, he's still in that bracket.
He's still a very young guy.
Yeah.
I just want to see, and maybe I'm unfair, maybe this is a standard, holding him too high, maybe not, but I want to see I want to see his name on a match. I want to come out of a game going, Engels dominated that. Now, he did show up in some early games and he did well in some Champions League games before the break, but I just want him to really put his name on a match. I want
scruff of the neck stuff.
Scruff of the neck stuff. And it doesn't have to be physical, but I just want to see him a bit more confident on the ball a wee bit more. And I heard someone say, it must have been an ex-player, but in fact it might have been, I can't remember who it was. Brilliant podcasting. They said that Brendan Rodgers would challenge Nicholas KUHN at every game.
It was Joe Hart.
Was it Joe Hart? He was saying at every half time, Brendan was saying, Nicholas KUHN, go out there and show us what you've got. Show them what you've got. And I'd send that same message to ARNE Engels. You're a good player. Forget the transfer fee for now. Just go out there and show us what you've got. Put your name on a game.
Yeah, and of course we do not want this to come across as writing off ARNE Engels close to the start of his Celtic career. That's not
nothing close to it.
No, I think we just need to be patient with Engels. To be honest, I think it's not a groundbreaking view from me here, but I just think we need to kind of wait it out and let him adjust to new surroundings. I'd totally agree with the fact that he is now a diminishing influence over the last few games. I think that bears out in some numbers as well. I think if you go back to the Dundee game, he was probably one of the better players in the game. Leipzig, very, very good indeed. But for the most recent game marks the third consecutive game where he has played the fewest passes of any midfielder. Now, again, we're up against Cal McGregor and Real Hatate, but it just means he's not having as big an influence over the game as his teammates are. I think that's okay though. I think at this stage it's all right. Celtic aren't suffering from that. We can afford to carry a player like that who is adjusting, and maybe just we need to show a little bit of patience with him. But I totally agree that he's not really having the influence over a game that you might hope for a guy of that reputation. And as much as I don't want to talk about transfer fees because it bores me senseless, it really does. I think it's completely irrelevant. The fact is, it's massive for Scotland and it's going to hang over him. I want to get away from that, but the easiest way to do that is if he was justifying it so far. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means in terms of justifying it, because it doesn't look like the guy who's going to score a load of goals like Matt O'Reilly eventually did. But we need to remember his first season. What did he score, 4 or something like that? Or his first full season? I don't think
it was less than 3 goals.
Yeah,
goals,
and even at that, it came towards the end of the season. He started scoring.
Last game of the season.
So we'd had him scouted. Again, when we throw out phrases like that, we had him scouted, right? What we mean is, if you're not familiar with it on our Patreon,
why wouldn't you be familiar with it, Stephen?
Well, there's no excuse for it now. We plug it often enough, but you should really be in there. You're missing out. But we, on our Patreon property we have is part of that. We do some scouting, and that is with the help of professionally commissioned scout from The Athletic, Alex, you've already mentioned him, Melly. So brought him in to have a look at Engels, and he was a little bit, not so much lukewarm on him. He just voiced some misgivings about not being able to quite identify what it is he's going to bring to Celtic just yet. I think he said that he was obviously a very good player, but it might take a wee while for him to
figure out what type of midfielder he is.
Yeah, and it didn't go down very well at the time, because obviously people will listen to that podcast hoping that we're told that he's the best player in Europe, that he will paid £11 million for this absolute starlet, whereas Alex in his scouting thought, right, okay, let's see how this develops, because it's not immediately obvious what he is going to transplant from Augsburg to Celtic, a team who are up against it probably most weeks, to a team who are dominant of the ball all the time. So I think we're maybe seeing that difficult transition because, as I say, it's quite clear that he's not having the influence over the game that you might have expected. But that's a huge adjustment to go from, yes, a very good league, but the bottom end of a very good league to the top end of a weaker league.
Yeah.
So I think we just need to see how it goes with him. Urge a little bit of patience. I'm not against taking him out of the team once or twice because we need to use the squad. I don't want that to be taken as using the D word, dropping him. It's nothing to do. I'm not having a go at him. But what we need to remember is, see if you want to see Bernardo played for a couple of games, he's also a Celtic player.
Yes.
And they are.
It's a crime I can't play some of these players, Brendan Rodgers, or I can't play all of my players, Brendan Rodgers said.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
not a crime, you choose.
And when a player, I can sense it as well. Obviously, with being a football fan, with a guy who is in the team just now and everyone's willing him to do well, there's a sensitivity around dropping him because they don't want to see that. But what I would say is that Bernardo and Engels, if you take the fees out of it entirely, the vastly different fees, they are ostensibly the same thing. The youngish Celtic midfielders who are vying for a position, one position between them, and they need game time. So I'm not really
It's not
bothered who plays.
Bernardo's fault that Celtic only paid $4.5 million for him and had to pay 11 million for
Exactly.
Engels.
But that just means that they're in the same position. So I'm not adverse. I'm not averse to seeing one of them given the odd game here and there. So I wouldn't like to take moving Bernardo into the position for a couple of games as like an outright condemnation of Engels' start.
It's not like he's finally been dropped. He's
no,
been rotten.
no, not at all. It's just I just wouldn't be against it because we don't. It might be the best thing for Engels' confidence just to keep playing him, or it might be the worst thing. But the thing with Celtic is we don't have to because we've got luxury here. We've got so many players for hardly any positions, and we kind of need to share out the responsibility a little bit. And that's not even mentioned Luke McCowan, who's kind of fallen out the team altogether in the last couple of games as well.
We're in a very fortunate position, aren't we? We're winning most games. We're even winning Champions League games. So it's not looking like you need to get this guy out of the team. I just think he had a bad game at the weekend. But if I look back to the Leipzig game, I thought he was absolutely brilliant. And would it surprise me if he scores and gets man of the match against his Belgian team during the week? It would not surprise me at all. What you're saying, Stephen's correct. I think what Alex is saying is correct. Is patience is the key with this guy. He probably doesn't maybe know what type of midfielder he is yet. He's coming in, and again, I'll look at him. I'll look at Austin Trusty. I'll look at Baye, and I'll look at Adam Ida. They've not hit the ground running. All brought in late on in the window, and the rest of the players have all mentioned it. I think even at the end of the game, Edith mentioned it about watching the Celtic games in pre-season and he's seen KUHN was flying in it. Guys like KUHN, Maeda, Hatate, they've all been flying because they all just go in and know what they're doing. Here it's taking these guys a wee bit longer. I've no doubts about any of them that they'll maybe buy him. Will be the hardest one to get some game time, but I think they'll all be very good Celtic players. They're just feeling their way into it and it's difficult coming in. Engels came in. Game against Rangers, straight into international break. Then you're into the Champions League games and started both games for Belgium. He's a good player. He's going to be a good player, I believe. Just he'll have the odd bad game here or there, using it again. But
Does he need something to go in off his arse? Does he need an assist to come off his arse?
He needs to fire one in from 40 yards. An absolute rocket.
He needs to take a corner with his arse.
There's the game during the week, I think he'll start that, but it's Ross County at the weekend. You wouldn't be surprised if Bernardo and McCowan came in for those games. And Celtic, the games are going to come thick and fast now. We've got Aberdeen away the next midweek. The next midweek we've got Zagreb. So there's going to be plenty of game time shared
coming
about.
Up. Yeah.
Yep.
It's a big one.
Yep.
Listen, look around. You see this lovely studio we're in? You've heard us mention patreon.com/20minutetims, and people support us on there and they sign up for 20 Minute Tims season tickets, or they sign up monthly, or there's free trials open. If you want to try that out for free, you can check us out and listen to some podcasts and see if you like us or not. But thanks to those good people at Patreon, we're getting to refurbish our lovely studio. Yeah. We've been here for how long?
There's 3 seasons. No, there's a fourth maybe.
Fourth season and third season in this current setup. We had a round table. The OGs will remember we were all sat around the table. Then we've got this beautiful thing that you see all around us. So for the next couple of weeks, the flagship podcast is going to look a wee bit different while we've got the builders in to refurbish this studio. And we can only do things like that.
The steel's already in place, don't worry about
it. Yes, we've ordered in the steel and the concrete. But we only get to do things like that thanks to the support from the people on Patreon. So thank you so much to our patrons who help us immensely with things like that. You mentioned it, Club Brugge in the Champions League, Melly. This is going to be a very, very exciting game, but maybe a tougher game than some people might think. Part of the Patreon, we've already mentioned it, we've had them scouted. What that means is Alex from The Athletic goes and watches plenty of Bruges games and he tells us how they play, who their danger men are, how they play on the ball, off the ball, how Celtic can hurt them, how they approach matches tactically and all that sort of stuff. And I listened to that podcast thinking, we're in for a tough challenge here, but not one that we can't overcome. But I think some people, just reading the tea leaves of social media, some people think this is another sort of bottom of the rung team that we're just going to roll right over.
I don't believe they're that. Alex didn't believe they're that, but I felt more confident after doing the podcast with him that the main takeaway from that was, like the Bratislava game, is play your game and you should be fine. So if Celtic turn up and play the way they've done against Leipzig, against probably Atalanta, against Bratislava, it should be enough for the victory. It doesn't always guarantee at this level because these are good teams that have players that can hurt you, but it is nice going into these games expecting more than hoping that you can get a victory. And this is always sort of asked from Celtic. This is an excellent opportunity for us to get 7 points already in this. 10 to go on top of the free and our free. Just 10 points, yes.
Thank you. I was hoping you would clarify because now I'm confused and I'm in the room with you.
we need the 10 points. And 10 points is that sort of one that was sort of mooted at the start that might be enough to get you through. We can get that with 3 games to go. It would be an incredible way going about it. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's a massive opportunity. Celtic Park will be rocking. Yeah. Get the thermals on because it's going to be cold, but I'm expecting fire inside.
It's going to be absolutely Baltic. There's no getting away from it, Stephen. These games are a tough old watch. Sometimes I'm going to have the long johns on, that's for sure. But I think the performance in the last couple of games has totally changed how we, the fans, us three anyway, are going to go into the stand and watch this game. We're going to be, because if we came at this game off the back of Dortmund, you'd be really worried about it. But coming off the back of the Atalanta and Leipzig games, completely different perspective now.
Oh, completely. I'm nervous of the confidence that it has brought. Though
can he win?
I know it's such an uneasy feeling because this is basically unprecedented now.
Yeah.
The level of performance that Celtic have been putting in consistently, save for the Dortmund game, of course, in the Champions League. I don't think we've ever really experienced anything like that before. Of course, we literally haven't because we've got so many games still to go. We're not basically out of it after 4 games like we normally would be. So it's a very uneasy feeling going in, thinking, rushing ahead as well. It's almost like you're looking past this and thinking about all the points we could accumulate in this, league stage. So I'm a little bit. That's the only thing giving me a little bit.
You think it's too good at the moment?
I
get it.
I'm getting a little bit of nerves about how confident we all are because it's the Champions League. It's still going to be difficult. It's still playing against fellow champions in a comparable league at a decent level. The Dedrick Boyata derby, as they call it worldwide. So looking forward to it. Is that extra bit of spice?
Didn't even make their Champions League squad. Just so you know, if you're expecting to see Big Deke, he won't be there.
Prior to tonight, I couldn't even have told you he was still there. I just know he ended up there after Hertha Berlin or the other one. I think it was
Ronnie
Hertha.
Dyler manage him as well?
Might have done. Yeah.
Hey, stop asking questions. Mate. Don't really know the answer to it.
It's rule number 1, isn't it? I'm nervous about it, but at the same time, it's that good nervous. It's that kind of butterflies in the stomach about what we could possibly achieve in a Champions League.
They beat Villa in the last game.
Yeah, and they won 7-0 at the weekend. I think they're on a good run just now. I don't think they've lost for a wee while. I think AC Milan beat them 3-1, I think it was, but they've been doing all right apart from that. So a good team. I don't think Celtic, despite the fact they've been excellent against Leipzig, an all-timer, that one, very, very impressive against Atalanta. I just don't think, even with those 2 games, and Bratislava as well. Bratislava was great fun on the night, but it seems like so long ago now. I don't think that even those games afford us the ability to be going into a game thinking we're going to absolutely cruise this against really any Champions League opposition. I thought that we have to beat Bratislava. If we're going to do anything, we have to beat Bratislava. But apart from that, the games all look to varying degrees of quite tough. So I'm confident about it, but it is that slightly nervy confidence that I'm not really sure how to take this in the Champions League. I don't know where this confidence is coming from.
We can reconvene after the match. Post-match match reaction will be out on the At The Match podcast on patreon.com/20Minute Tims. Thank you very much for watching. Listen, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Just to remind you once again that over the next maybe 2 or 3 weeks, the podcast, if you watch it on YouTube, will look slightly different. We'll be recording remotely while the studio's getting refurbished, but we'll be back in a couple of weeks with a brand new studio, hopefully before Christmas. Thanks for watching and listening.